Here we are at Lake Jackson, which is a lake on the order of maybe 4,000 acres. And right now we're staring at it, and it's a prairie as opposed to a lake.
That's John Arthur of Florida's Geological Survey. He's exploring the dry lake bed and former home of lunker bass with Richard Drew of Florida Department of Environmental Protection's Water Resources Management Division.
I have a pick I pulled out of my car because we need to make our way down the sinkhole and show where the water is flowing into the sink. Yeah, this is a great view. Yeah, come around, I'll pull the weeds back for you. Lake Jackson has drained into a sinkhole, which feeds into the Florida Aquifer system. Along the margins of this lake, you see homes, some of which are quite beautiful. They have docks, and I'm sure they're not happy about having to mow around their docks.
This fickle lake may confound those who live on its waterfront, but such is the way of water here in Florida. The interaction between surface water and groundwater is dynamic. Lake Jackson is filled, and like an unplugged bathtub, drained many times before into the aquifer via sinkholes.
The surface water that runs into this sinkhole is a perfect example of a vulnerable point of the aquifer system. We get about 90% of our drinking water in Florida from the aquifer. And areas where surface water runs into the aquifer without any kind of natural filtration, that is a very vulnerable point because any contaminants in that surface water are also going into our drinking water.
Lake Jackson shows us that the connection between surface water and groundwater is closer than people think. Pollutants on the ground surface sometimes rapidly infiltrate Florida's shallow aquifer. This is particularly evident in Wakulla County, just 10 miles south of Lake Jackson. Here, windows into the aquifer dot the landscape, and one can literally dive into the aquifer. However, the effects of groundwater pollution are evident in places like Wakulla Spring. The once crystal clear water is now darkened by green algae fueled by nitrates, a byproduct of wastewater treatment, septic systems, and fertilizers used on lawns and in agriculture.
We have between 800 and 1,000 people moving to Florida every day, depending on the economy. And also depending on the economy, things grow. We see condominiums and apartments and stormwater ponds springing up all over the place. And knowing where the aquifer is more or less vulnerable helps us make some smart decisions about where to allow these places to be developed. Where do you want to put your pipeline? Where do you want to put a landfill? What neighborhood should be on septic versus sewer? All of these things hinge on the vulnerability of the aquifer system because ultimately we want to protect that resource.
Protecting the aquifer from pollution is only half the battle because even in water-rich Florida, the groundwater supply is stressed, particularly during periods of drought. More than 6.5 billion gallons of water are used daily, and most of it is water withdrawn from the aquifer.
What we're trying to do, working with the water management districts, is to come up with ways to provide, better use the water and maybe provide other sources of water that will be able to feed that population as it increases over the next period of time.
The best single step, everyone agrees, is conservation. It's been estimated that half of the groundwater being used could be saved simply through conservation.
In the last 5 or so years, the state has really put a lot of emphasis in conservation, particularly in those areas where we have the populations, and it's reaped a benefit. We have seen diminished water use per capita.
Florida DEP and water managers have pursued many solutions to augment the groundwater supply, including reclaiming and reusing treated wastewater.
When we have water coming into a sewage treatment plant, we treat it to a high level, and then we have reuse, which is basically taking that wastewater and instead of disposing of it in a stream or river and having it go to tide, go into the ocean, what we're doing is we're trying to put it back on crops, put it back on golf courses, use it in areas that would typically be drawing water from the aquifer.
Drew adds that DEP is working to protect groundwater by encouraging communities to diversify their water supply sources. The Tampa Bay region, which has a history of overuse of its groundwater resources, is now what many consider to be ground zero for water supply protection. The counties and cities surrounding Tampa Bay are part of a regional water delivery system that uses a mix of groundwater, aquifer storage and recovery, surface water reservoirs, and now desalinated water.
And here we are. This is what they call the headworks of the plant. That water's coming up in the plant for the first time.
That's Chuck Carden of Tampa Bay Water, which supplies drinking water to 2.6 million people. At the Tampa Bay Seawater Desalination Plant, now the nation's largest, 17,000 gallons of seawater is turned into drinking water every 60 seconds.
Basically, the water in here will clump with the chemicals, and it gets real heavy, and it settles to the bottom of these basins, these big swimming pools.
First, there's a series of mechanical and chemical processes during which sediments and contaminants are filtered out. Then, the seawater ends up in the plant's inner sanctum.
This is where the salt is removed. Up until this point, that water looks pretty good, but it still has the salt in it until it gets here.
In the reverse osmosis building, the water is forced at high pressure through fine membranes that trap salt.
Once we take it through the membranes, it strips out everything in that water, minerals, everything, salt, and it's the purest state of water, purest state that you can get the water, but it really doesn't have a taste to it at that point. It's got no taste, it's just wet.
The final step of the process is adding minerals and other ingredients back in so that the desalinated water tastes, well, like water.
This morning, water that was out there, manatees were swimming in, came into our plant, and 1 hour later, it's in that tank.
From there, the desalinated water travels north through a 14-mile pipeline and is blended with treated water from rivers and with groundwater before being distributed to customers. It's a complex journey, one that is ensuring a reliable water supply for the Tampa Bay region while also taking the pressure off the region's groundwater supply.
The way I think of it is it's not just one silver bullet out there that's going to save you. It's a combination of a bunch of different types, like we've done here. A desal plant, a surface water system, and a groundwater system. All three make it work.